Suburban Ohio. November 24th. A daughter sits at a dinner table that feels like a trap. The smell of pot roast fills the room, masking the rot beneath the floorboards. My name is Leah Pratt, and I am watching my parents toast to my brother's success, unaware that they paid for it by stealing my entire future. They believe I am the quiet schoolteacher who will swallow the betrayal to keep the peace. But as my father raises his glass to the family legacy, he doesn't realize he just handed me the weapon that will bring it all crashing down. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The smell of slow-cooked pot roast and polished wood usually signaled comfort, but at my parents' house, it always smelled like obligation. I sat at the heavy oak dining table, the same one I'd been spilled milk on as a toddler, and lectured at as a teenager, feeling the familiar sensation of shrinking. It was a Sunday in late November, the kind of crisp, gray Ohio afternoon that demanded football on the television and performative family unity. From the living room, the low murmur of the game provided a backdrop to the clink of silverware and the rustle of linen napkins. Outside on the porch, my father's oversized American flag snapped in the wind, a beacon of the wholesome traditional values the Pratt family supposedly embodied. Inside, however, I felt less like a daughter and more like a prop used to fill an empty chair. I took a quiet sip of my sweet tea, trying to make myself as small as possible between my uncle's booming laugh and my mother's critical gaze. I was 27 years old, a public school teacher who worked 50-hour weeks, tutored underprivileged kids on weekends, and volunteered at the community center, yet in this house I was invisible. The conversation, as always, revolved around my older brother Tyler. He was the golden boy, the former high school quarterback, who now ran Pratt Hardware, the family business. He sat across from me, radiating that easy, unearned confidence that drove me crazy, his arm draped casually over the back of his fiancée, Ava's chair. Beside me, Cole's knee brushed against mine under the table. It was a deliberate grounding touch. Cole Maddox was the only reason I hadn't made an excuse to leave an hour ago. He wore a clean flannel shirt and dark jeans, his hands calloused and rough from his work as a general contractor. My family treated him with a polite but distinct condescension, viewing him as just a laborer who swung a hammer for a living. They didn't see his kindness, his intelligence, or the way he was the only steady thing in my chaotic world. To my parents, Marilyn and Hank Pratt, pillars of the church board, heavy donors to the Chamber of Commerce and local royalty, Cole was serviceable but not impressive. He wasn't a Pratt. My mother, Marilyn, picked up her crystal wine glass and tapped it sharply with a spoon. The chime cut through the room, silencing the side conversations. She smiled, that polished, performative smile that made my stomach knot, the one she wore for church greeter duty and charity galas. My father, Hank, sat at the head of the table, puffing out his chest. "We have some wonderful news about the Pratt family's future," Hank announced, his voice booming with pride. He looked affectionately at Tyler and Ava, and specifically regarding Tyler and Ava's next chapter. I braced myself. I expected them to announce a new boat, or perhaps an expansion of the hardware store's inventory. Maybe they were buying a vacation home. Instead, Hank beamed. "Tyler has always dreamed of expanding beyond hardware. He wants to open a luxury showroom, Pratt Home and Design, in the city. High-end fixtures, custom installs, a real step up. And to make that dream a reality," my mother cut in, her eyes glistening with theatrical tears, "we have decided to invest in Tyler's future. We've used the family funds Grandma June left for all of us to secure the lease and cover the renovation costs. It's a substantial investment, around $85,000, but it secures the legacy." The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt. I froze, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. Grandma June, the only person in this family who had ever truly seen me, had left that money in a trust specifically in my name. She had told me on her deathbed that it was for me to buy a modest house to have independence. "What do you mean, family funds?" I asked, my voice shaking. The silence that followed was heavy. Hank didn't even look up from his roast beef. We access the trust Leah. As the trustees until you turn 30, it is technically ours to manage for the best interest of the family assets. I felt physically sick, a hot wave of nausea rolling through me. It wasn't just the money, it was the violation. You took my money, that trust is in my name. Grandma June left that for me. We didn't steal anything, Marilyn insisted, her tone dripping with condescending sweetness. We reallocated it. Tyler's expansion will secure the Pratt legacy for decades. You're a teacher, Leah. You have a steady income. You can always save again, honey. It's not like you're ready to buy a home anyway. Tyler chuckled, taking a sip of his beer. Yeah, Lee. You rent that little apartment. You're fine. Don't be greedy. Laughter rippled around the table. My face burned with humiliation. They were laughing at the theft of my future. The chair legs scraped loudly against the hardwood as I stood up. A choking cocktail of rage and grief rose in my throat. Grandma told me that money was for me, I said, my voice rising. She wanted me to have a home. You had no right. Hank's face turned stony. The benevolent patriarch mask slipped. Sit down, Leah. You are being ungrateful and dramatic. You've always been too sensitive about money. This is for the family. Did Leah agree in writing? The voice was calm, low, and firm. Everyone turned to look at Cole. He hadn't moved, but his presence suddenly filled the room. Hank scoffed, rolling his eyes. Oh, please! Spare us the legal talk, son. You swing a hammer. This is a complex financial matter. Cole didn't blink. He didn't look at Hank. He looked at the tablecloth, smoothing a wrinkle with a calloused thumb. Using trust assets for personal benefit without the beneficiary's consent is fraud, Hank. Regardless of who the trustee is, there are fiduciary duties. If you moved that money without her signature, there could be consequences. The room went dead quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped. Marilyn looked from Cole to Hank, her smile faltering. We have every right, she snapped. Leah will understand when she's older. My hands were trembling, but seeing Cole's calm gave me a backbone. I want every document, I said, my voice steadying. I want to see the trust statements. If you don't fix this, I will make sure someone else does. Hank's face darkened to a dangerous shade of red. He pointed a steak knife at me. Don't you threaten this family, young lady. You walk out that door with that attitude and you're on your own. Cole reached up and squeezed my hand. He stood up, then slowly towering over the table. You've got 72 hours, Mr. Pratt, Cole said quietly. Give Leah back what's hers, or this stops being a family discussion. In that moment, with my father glaring and my brother smirking, I realized something bone-deep and terrifying. My own family just chose the Pratt legacy over me. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a heart that felt bruised, heavy, and sluggish in my chest. Sunlight streamed through my apartment blinds, indifferent to the fact that my world had effectively collapsed over roast beef less than 24 hours ago. I dragged myself to school, going through the motions of teaching history to 7th graders, but my mind was miles away, dissecting every word spoken at that dining table. During my lunch break, I locked myself in my classroom and dialed the number for the trust administrator at the local bank. My hands were sweating so badly, I almost dropped the phone. When I gave the administrator my details, the line went quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. She put me on hold, and when she returned, her voice was tight. She transferred me immediately to Mr. Ellsworth, the senior trust officer. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He asked me point blank if I recalled giving verbal consent over the phone 3 months ago to liquefy assets to assist in family business expansion. I was stunned. I told him absolutely not. Absolutely. Ellsworth paused, the silence stretching like a rubber band about to snap, before explaining that there was a typed memo in the file claiming I had called, authorized the transfer, and agreed to sign waivers later. The memo was signed, recorded by Marilyn Pratt, co-trustee. I felt violated. It wasn't just theft. It was as if they had broken into my mind and rewritten my history. They had stolen my voice to justify stealing my money. I demanded every document be emailed to me immediately. 10 minutes later, hiding in a staff bathroom stall, I opened the PDFs on my phone. There it was. A fabrication describing a phone call that never happened, filled with phrases I would never use, talking about family loyalty and investing in Tyler's brilliance. The witness line bore my mother's confident looping signature. My hands shook with a cold, vibrating fury. I forwarded everything to a new secure email folder I named Ammo. I thought the worst was over for the day, but the Pratts were efficient. That afternoon, my principal called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, shifting papers on his desk. He told me they had received an anonymous concern from a community member. Later, I'd confirm it was Tyler claiming I was financially unstable, behaving erratically, and obsessed with money, to the point where it might affect my fitness around children. I sat there crushed, realizing the terrifying scope of their retaliation. They weren't just taking the money, they were scorching the earth beneath my feet to destroy my credibility before I could fight back. The principal was polite, but distant, suggesting that HR might need to follow up. By the time I got to my car, the smear campaign had moved online. I made the mistake of checking social media. Ava had posted a photo of a stormy sky with a vague, passive-aggressive caption, "Pray for our family. It's so sad when some people care more about money than love. Greed is a poison." The comments were a firing squad of local gossip. Relatives I'd known my whole life commented things like, "So sad when jealousy poisons blood," and "Some people forget who raised them." I felt utterly betrayed, seeing a lifetime of Sunday dinners and childhood holidays weaponized against me in the comment section. Miserable but determined, I drove straight to the office of Allison Griggs, a bulldog of an attorney recommended by a friend at the community center. I handed over a check for the retainer, draining almost my entire emergency freedom fund. It was money I had scraped together from tutoring gigs intended for a rainy day. This wasn't just rain. It was a hurricane. But spending it felt like an investment in my own survival. Allison reviewed the PDFs, her eyebrows shooting up. She called the memo sloppy fraud, noting the wrong date, inconsistent language, and the lack of a third-party witness. She suggested bringing in a forensic accountant, suspecting the multiple withdrawals were structured to avoid federal reporting limits. When I left her office, my phone lit up. It was my father. I hit record before answering. Hank was furious, his voice a low growl. He knew I'd hired a lawyer. Small towns talk fast. He threatened to cut me out of the will completely and tell the pastor I had gone rogue. I let him scream, saving the audio file the moment he hung up. Then came the text from Marilyn, long winding paragraphs about forgiveness and family unity, painting me as cold-hearted for not supporting my brother's American dream. Allison drafted a formal demand letter that afternoon: return the full amount plus damages within 72 hours, or face civil and possible criminal action. We sent it certified to my parents and the bank. The stakes were incredibly high. Pratt Hardware employed half the town and sponsored everything from Little League to the 4th of July parade. A fraud scandal would shatter their reputation and rock the community. I felt torn. I didn't want to hurt innocent employees, but I refused to be the quiet, sacrificial lamb any longer. I collapsed onto the sofa in Cole's small apartment above his workshop that night, exhausted. I vented everything to him, expecting just comfort. Instead, Cole surprised me. He started asking pointed, strategic questions about the bank's leverage and the specific wording of the trust deed. He navigated the legal jargon with an ease that didn't match his simple contractor persona. When I asked how he knew all this, he just shrugged, brushing it off. "Let's just say I've seen what rich people do when they think no one's watching." He looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. "I might have other ways to put pressure on them, Leah, but I'm not ready to show that hand just yet. For the first time in days, I feel something besides rage and shame. I feel the first cold spark of a plan." The summons came through the pastor because of course it did. My parents were masters of triangulation, and they knew I wouldn't hang up on Reverend Miller. He explained in a voice thick with manufactured concern that my parents were heartbroken over our misunderstanding and wanted to extend an olive branch. They wanted me to attend the Chamber of Commerce banquet at the Civic Center that Friday night. The request came with a specific stipulation: I was to stand beside Tyler and Ava during the keynote speech to publicly bless the new store expansion and show the town that the Pratt family remained united. In exchange, they promised we would talk about making things right afterward. I knew immediately it was a trap, a staged humiliation designed to force my compliance in front of an audience I couldn't cause a scene in front of. Allison, my attorney, told me to go. If he tries to bully you into signing a waiver in public, she said, we want witnesses. Cole was even more direct. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, a rare sight, he told me quietly, let them build the stage, Leah, then we'll decide who falls off of it. So I agreed. I chose a dress that wasn't flashy, just a simple navy sheath that made me feel strong and dignified. I wasn't there to compete. I was there to witness a funeral, though I didn't know it yet. The Civic Center was a suffocating wash of red, white, and blue bunting. Banners hung from the rafters thanking sponsors, with Pratt Hardware serving our town since 1974 prominently displayed above the stage. The air smelled of stale coffee and expensive perfume. Hank was working the room like a seasoned politician, gripping elbows and slapping backs, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. Marilyn clung to Ava, making a show of touching Ava's stomach, hinting at future grandchildren to distract from the tension. I felt physically outnumbered, a singular point of resistance in a sea of people who had bought the Pratt myth hook, line, and sinker. But I had Allison near the exit, and I had Cole beside me. Halfway through the speeches, the moment arrived. Hank took the podium, his voice booming with false warmth. I'd like to invite my daughter Leah to the stage. She's our strong girl, a teacher who cares so much even if she got a little overwhelmed recently. He beckoned me up. My heart hammered against my ribs as I climbed the stairs. Hank presented a leather folder and a pen on the lectern. We're going to clear up any misunderstandings tonight, he announced to the room. So this town knows the Pratts stand together. I looked down at the paper. It was a retroactive consent form acknowledging the withdrawal as a loan and waiving my rights to the trust. Before I could be cornered into refusing or signing, Cole stepped onto the stage. He didn't rush. He moved with a predator's calm. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Who is that? Someone whispered. Cole walked past my father and took the microphone from the stand. I'm sorry to interrupt, Cole said, his voice level and cutting through the feedback. I'm Cole Maddox. Most of you know me as the contractor who fixes your roofs, but I'm also the managing partner of Maddox Ellison Holdings. He paused, letting the name land. We are the investment group that recently acquired a controlling interest in the regional bank that holds the Pratt family loans and trust accounts. My father froze. The color drained from his face. Behind us, a projector screen commanded by Cole's team, who had slipped into the AV booth unnoticed, lit up. It wasn't a slide about hardware. It was a PDF of the memo Marilyn had forged. What we have here, Cole explained to the stunned room, is a document authorizing the removal of trust funds. It claims a phone call took place on September 12th. However, phone records show no such call occurred. The signature is not Leah's. It was signed by Marilyn Pratt. The slide changed. Now it showed transfer logs highlighting withdrawals carefully structured to stay under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting. Then the kicker, screenshots of texts from Hank and Marilyn to Tyler mocking me as too soft to fight back and easy to manipulate. This isn't a family misunderstanding, Cole said, looking directly at the crowd. This is systematic fraud and embezzlement. He's a liar, Tyler shouted from the front row, sputtering as he stood up. She's just money hungry. She's jealous. I stepped up to the mic, my hands shaking but my voice clear. This isn't about jealousy, Tyler. I read from the screen where a section of Grandma June's will was now projected. For the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Leah June Pratt, to secure her independent future. I looked at my parents. You stole that future, and you tried to destroy my reputation to cover it up. Allison stepped forward from the wings, flanked by another attorney in a sharp suit. She announced that given the evidence of fraud, Maddox Ellison had already filed a notice with state regulators. Hank and Marilyn Pratt face an immediate review of all commercial loans, she said loudly. and potential criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. Cole dropped the final hammer. Maddox Ellison holds the note on the hardware store's building. We are prepared to call in that loan and foreclose immediately if full restitution isn't made. Marilyn broke down sobbing loudly about our reputation and what will the church think. Hank turned on me, his eyes bulging with rage. You traitor! You're killing this family! You're killing the business! You killed it! I said, my voice cracking but firm. You chose to steal from your own daughter. You chose to smear me to my boss. You chose the lie over me. I've fought for every student I teach, but no one in this family ever fought for me, until now. Allison laid a document on the lectern right over the one Hank had tried to make me sign. You have a choice. Sign this agreement to repay the full trust amount plus damages using the store as collateral and issue a public statement of wrongdoing, or we file a formal criminal complaint on Monday morning. The room was dead silent. The neighbors, the pastor, the sponsors, they were all staring stunned, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of the truth. My father looked at the papers, then at me, and for the first time in my life, I see it the moment Hank Pratt realizes the daughter he underestimated is the one holding the match. The silence that followed the public dismantling of the Pratt family legacy was louder than any scream I had ever heard. Under the harsh glare of the stage lights, my father, a man who had spent his life dictating terms to everyone else, looked small. He was cornered, sweating through his suit, his hand trembling as he gripped the pen Allison had provided. He signed the agreement, the scratching of the nib against the paper the only sound in the cavernous room. Beside him, my mother clutched his arm, her eyes darting frantically around the crowd, not checking to see if I was okay, but whispering frantically about ruined reputations and what the pastor would say on Sunday. Tyler stormed out the side exit with Ava pausing only long enough to spit at me that I had burned the whole family down over a house. Walking out of the Civic Center that night, the reaction from the town was a messy, suffocating mix of shock and judgment. People I had known since kindergarten avoided eye contact, staring at their shoes as if terrified that acknowledging me would force them to pick a side. A few brave souls, mostly parents of the kids I tutored, squeezed my hand or murmured a quiet apology as they passed, but others glared at me with undisguised hostility. To them, I wasn't the victim of fraud. I was the daughter who had committed the cardinal sin of airing dirty laundry. I drove home feeling vindicated, yes, but also hollow. Justice, I realized, didn't magically erase the pain. It just exposed the wound to the air. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion car crash for my parents. To satisfy the repayment terms and avoid criminal charges, they had to liquidate everything. They remortgaged their pristine suburban home and eventually sold Pratt Hardware. The day the iconic sign came down, replaced by a corporate logo from a national chain, the gossip at the diner reached a fever pitch. The Pratts stopped showing up at church. Their social world, once vast and admiring, shrank to nothing. They were learning the hard way that their friends loved their influence, not them. When the wire transfer finally hit my account, the full trust amount, plus damages, I stared at the number on my banking app for a long time. It was enough money to change my life, yet it felt heavy. It was my freedom, but it was also a permanent numerical reminder of how far my parents had been willing to go to deny me that freedom. Cole suggested we take a trip, maybe leave town and start over somewhere fresh, but Allison reminded me that I now had options. I could buy a house, I could invest, I could just breathe. The emotional fallout was harder to manage than the financial one. Marilyn sent long, tearful voicemails late at night. They oscillated wildly between guilt trips sobbing about, "Look what you've done to us," and wallowing in self-pity, claiming they were being punished disproportionately for one little mistake. I never picked up. Then came the text from Hank. Just one line arriving on a Tuesday afternoon while I was grading papers. "You're not my daughter anymore." I stared at the screen, waiting for the devastation to hit. It did a sharp, cold puncture in my chest, but it was quickly followed by a strange, settling calm. I started therapy the next week, finally unpacking what it meant to be the reliable one, the emotional mule who had carried everyone else's burdens until my back broke. I decided to reclaim the only part of the family legacy that had ever been real. Cole and I drove out to the edge of town to look at a rundown farmhouse. It was Grandma June's childhood home sold off years ago, and now back on the market cheap because the foundation was settling and the porch was rotting. It was a wreck, but as we walked through the tall grass, I saw the good bones. I remembered the stories June used to tell me about this porch. I bought it with part of the restored trust. The deed was in my name, not my parents', not a trust mine. We didn't fix it alone. I invited kids from the community center, my best friend Jasmine, and a few neighbors who had stuck by me. We spent our Saturdays sanding floors and painting walls, the air filled with classic rock radio and the smell of sawdust. The house became alive with honest work and shared effort, a stark contrast to the fake appearances of my childhood home. We planned to turn the downstairs parlor into the June Pratt Learning Room, a free tutoring space. Word trickled back that Tyler's expansion deal had collapsed immediately after the scandal broke. Ava ended the engagement posting cryptic quotes about trust on Instagram before moving back to her parents' house. Tyler was reportedly drinking heavily, telling anyone at the local bar who would listen that his sister had ruined his life. I felt no triumph in his misery, just a tired sadness. It was proof that people who refuse to take responsibility will always find a scapegoat. One evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Cole and I stood on the newly repaired porch. I was covered in primer, my muscles aching in a good way. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it and saw the preview. I drove past the old farmhouse today. Can we talk, Mom? My heart clenched. I looked at the screen, then at the sturdy wooden railing Cole had just finished sanding. I remembered the little girl inside me who still, despite everything, wanted a mother who chose her. I stare at the message until the sun disappears, torn between the ache of old wounds and the quiet, stubborn freedom pulsing in my chest. 2 years later, the farmhouse didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a home. It was a humid Saturday in late July, and the air around the porch was thick with the smell of charcoal smoke, blooming hydrangeas, and the high-pitched shriek of children playing tag. A hand-painted banner strung between 2 oak trees fluttered in the breeze. Pratt House Learning Center, grand opening. I moved through the crowd, refilling cups of lemonade and dodging running toddlers, feeling a sense of solidity I had never known in my parents' house. I wasn't shrinking into the wallpaper anymore. I was the foundation. My life had found a new, quieter rhythm. I still taught at the middle school, but I had cut back my hours to run free tutoring sessions and life skills workshops right here in the downstairs parlor. It was the kind of work that didn't pay in prestige, but it paid in sleep-filled nights and clear conscience. Cole was manning the grill, laughing as a group of teenage boys tried to critique his burger-flipping technique. His construction business was thriving, specializing in restoring historic homes, and he had made a point of hiring some of my older students who needed a trade more than they needed a lecture. I looked at the simple gold band on his finger matching the one on mine. We had gotten married 6 months ago at the courthouse with just Allison and Jasmine as witnesses. There was no performance, no debt, just quiet joy. The Pratt name still meant something in this town, but the definition had fractured. My parents were living in a cramped rental duplex on the edge of town, the kind of place my father used to sneer at when we drove past. Hank was working at a chain hardware store wearing an orange vest and answering to a manager half his age. They weren't community royalty anymore. They were just an older couple trying to make rent, stripped of the influence that had once shielded them. Tyler had moved 2 states away, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and sour rumors. I'd seen his Instagram once, a curated feed of rented cars and bottle service, but the locals knew the truth. He was running from a reality he couldn't manipulate. I had tried once to offer a bridge. I met Marilyn for coffee about 6 months after the scandal. She had cried, grasping my hands across the sticky table, apologizing over and over. But as I listened, I realized she wasn't apologizing for stealing my future or trying to ruin my name. She was apologizing for how it all looked and how messy it got. She missed the reputation, not the relationship. I told her calmly that forgiveness didn't mean access. Now we maintained a low-contact peace. Occasional polite texts on holidays, but no more emotional hostage situations. I had learned that freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply having the right to choose who sat at your table. I took a moment to lean against the porch railing watching the party. Growing up, I was taught that family values meant loyalty, no matter the cost, protecting the bloodline, even when it was poisoned. I had to unlearn all of it. I realize now that true community stands with the truth, not just with the loudest or richest person in the room. Resilience wasn't about enduring abuse in silence. It was about the courage to burn the bridge and rebuild your life on the other side. Personal freedom meant I didn't have to trade my self-respect for a seat at anyone's Sunday dinner. A movement caught my eye. Maya, a shy teenage girl from the neighborhood who I'd been tutoring in math, walked up to me. She looked at her sneakers, then thrust a folded piece of notebook paper into my hand. "I got into community college," she mumbled, fighting a smile. "And I wrote this. Thanks, Mrs. Maddox." I unfolded the note. In neat, loopy cursive, she had written, "You're the first adult who believed I deserved better. Thank you for seeing me." My throat tightened. This was the legacy I wanted. Not a family name plastered on a hardware store sign, but lives actually changed. As the sun began to dip, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, I saw them. Hank and Marilyn were standing at the very edge of the property near the gravel road. They looked hesitant, older, holding a foil-covered casserole dish between them like a shield. They were looking at the house, at the life I had built without them. Cole stepped up beside me, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw them too, his jaw set. "You want me to tell them to leave?" I watched them for a moment. My mother offered a small, awkward wave. My father just stood there, hands in his pockets. "No," I said softly. "It's okay. They can stand on the edge." I nodded politely to them, a simple acknowledgement of their existence, but I didn't wave them over. I didn't invite them up to the porch. There was no screaming match, no dramatic showdown. There was just a visible boundary, invisible to everyone else, but uncrossable for them. They set the casserole on the mailbox post and turned back toward their car. I turned back to the door. Screwed into the wood was a small, polished brass plaque I had ordered weeks ago. It caught the dying light. It read, "The June Pratt House," for anyone who was told they didn't deserve better. I rested my palm against the cool metal, feeling the solid wood of the doorframe beneath it. I listened to the laughter echoing from the learning room, bouncing off walls I had scraped and painted with my own hands. For the first time in my life, the name Pratt doesn't feel like a chain around my neck. It feels like a key I forged myself. That brings us to the end of Leah's journey, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply building a life they can't touch. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. What would you have done in Leah's shoes? Let us know down below. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.